Everyone in a good spot? Everyone happy? Oh, good. Well, thanks for being here today in our, I guess, newly revamped office, and we're benefiting from the Thunderdome, which is quite a new addition to the Journey Further office. This is often a space where we love to come together as a PPC team to debate new ideas and have discussions and fruitful conversations, and I'm sure we're going to have plenty more of that this evening. Yeah, let's not run out of battery.
Yeah.
So yeah, welcome to the Journey Further offices. I'm Sean, so I do have, I suppose, admittedly more experience than I'd like to say, to be honest. Graduated from university, went straight into PPC at Summit Media in Hull, and actually I can see a few ex-Summiters here today. I think half the room in here is somehow connected to Summit Media in some shape or form. And as you can imagine, in 15 years, I've seen a hell of a lot of a change within the industry, and the way we approach PPC today is entirely different. So those first few years I can just write off completely, I think, as we do things in an entirely different way. But one thing I would say is to the people that usually come from an SEO department, usually they say, PPC is easy these days, isn't it? You know, smart bidding, performance max, what are you guys actually doing? Are you doing any work? It's all automated. And I would say absolutely not. Not the case. We are far more hardworking these days than we ever have been. We've got multiple campaign formats that we need to manage. Yes, we're not doing bid adjustments all the time, but we are managing lots more features than we used to have to manage. The conversion setup on accounts is far more advanced, so if a client breaks that, then we have an uphill battle to fix that immediately. Otherwise, account performance is just going to go downhill immediately. And just in general, Google Ads has far more features than it ever used to. And because of that, we are constantly testing these new features all the time. And that's what I'm going to be focusing our discussion on today, is really about testing, and I suppose some of our approach to testing from an agency perspective, and where we think things are going, where this is moving. Which one is it? Is it clicker?
No, it's that one.
Oh, cool. No worries. So, yeah, I mean, this really feeds into the core conversation topic today, really, is the fundamentals of search excellence. And we've been deliberating this over the past few months in terms of how can we deliver the best possible performance for our clients. And really, we felt like this came down to two core areas, really. So we've got account health, so best practice. Our accounts running as effectively as they possibly can be from a hygiene perspective and a best practice perspective. And what we found is that when it comes to things like account audits and that type of thing, we were constantly doing these, and it was taking so much time to do these, and we were running out of time, honestly, in most of these things. So we wanted to deliver an approach that made this much more efficient for us. The second part of this was test and learn. So from a PPC perspective, everything that we're doing is fundamentally based on testing. And we wanted to build a tool which would encompass both of these things together. And that's essentially what we did. So we built a tool called the Search Excellence Tool. So from a hygiene perspective, this was ultimately grading our accounts in different areas. So looking at things like adverts, audience, brand, data maturity, feed health, and shopping and PMAX. We spent countless hours defining the logic for each of these areas. And through connection to the Google Ads API, we were able to deliver these daily automated health checks. Excuse me. This is spend weighted as well, which means that the higher spending campaigns ultimately carried more weight when it came to delivering this hygiene score ultimately. And I'm not going to go into absolutely everything that this tool does and the things that it's looking at, but we're looking at really the core principles of modern PPC within this. So from an account structure perspective, we're looking at, is there too much segmentation? So are there campaigns that are segmented by match type, for example, by device? Have we got multiple landing pages ad groups that are going to multiple landing pages, for example, that could be a sign that the account is too fragmented. So a lot of this structure stuff is looking at, is the account not consolidated enough? Is it overly fragmented ultimately? From a data perspective, we're looking at things like, is value-based bidding being used? Have we got privacy-centric features like consent mode and enhanced conversions enabled? From a PMAX perspective, looking at the use of audience signals, for example, are they being used to their best possible capability? And then when it comes to feed management, we're looking at things like, are the product titles the optimum length? So spent a long time, I'm working alongside Google to kind of really define these best practices that we're using. And ultimately, that spat out a search excellence score at the end of it. The other element of this comes down to testing, which is a secondary part of the tool. So if we're running certain tests, this is also going to help give you a better search excellence score. So for example, from an ad copy perspective, have we tested unpinned headlines within our RSAs? Have we tested ad customizers? From a brand perspective, have we run a brand incrementality test? We don't necessarily have to have had a positive outcome to score well on these features, but the fact that we have done that test shows that there is a benefit because we're doing a good job, because at least we're testing all of these different elements. So these are the core principles of kind of modern PPC, which really kind of fundamentally search excellence score at the end. So just diving into this in a little bit of detail. So all of our accounts within the MCC will spit out a view such as this, so we can grade the score. It will show us ultimately where we need to focus our efforts. The nice little diagram will show us, which parts of the account look weak. So is it the structure of the account that's weak? Is it the fact that the adverts are not in a good position, for example, from an ad strength perspective? And in each of those different categories, we can then drill down into further detail. So for example, in the structure element, we can further drill down to areas like, okay, is conversion volume at campaign level a problem? So one thing that we've identified during our tests is that, for example, if a campaign has less than 50 conversions, or 30 conversions even in a 30-day period, we know that we're not providing enough conversion data to Google for it to do a reasonable job from a bidding perspective. So yeah, this view will give us that. We can drill down to those categories and then subcategories within that as well. I think my favourite part of this tool is the fact that we can share our learnings from PPC tests with clients ultimately. So the first part of the tool is the health check, which I've just shown you. The second part of the tool is, I guess, a vehicle for all of our team to log tests in a way that we can collate the data as one. And then, for example, if we want to look at, for example, the use of unpinning on responsive search ads, we can run a department-wide test to see what the output of that test was across the entire department. So when we have access to this sort of data, it gives us, I suppose, a lot of potential to be able to go to our clients and say, look, okay, we've tried this test in the past. It has an 80% success rate. Therefore, you've got a good chance this particular test is going to be successful for you. So we found that that's been really, really useful for us. And I think we've learned a lot over this period. I mean, we've been logging results into this tool now for, I guess, at least a year. We've run a hell of a lot of tests during that period. And this is the process that we've taken throughout this. So ultimately, over that period, we ran around 200 Google Ads experiments. When it comes to testing, I would always recommend to use experiments wherever possible. It's going to give you a nice, clean A/B testing environment. It gives you nice statistical significance tools in there as well. And we'd always recommend a 95% confidence threshold when it comes to running these sort of tests within Google Ads. So where possible, we used experiments. Of course, there are certain types of tests within Google that you can't use experiments for. So, for example, feed optimization and that type of thing. Any sort of shopping test, generally experiments won't work well for them. So we used a before and after approach for those sort of tests. And we segmented the results by retail and lead gen. And this meant that we had a nice data set where we could look at certain tests by sector to give us a really nice set of results at the end of the day. So what I'm going to do now is just drill through a few of the things that we found. This is probably what you find a little bit more interesting. What have we tested and what was the output of these results at the end of the day? So first one I'm looking at here is responsive search ads. And I guess I came from a world really where standard advert testing, when I first started out, was a case of A/B testing certain headlines, moving on, reiteration, and just going through a cycle like that constantly. So this update to responsive search ads was actually quite unnerving for me, to be honest, when they came out. Just the idea of throwing in lots of headlines, lots of descriptions, and allowing Google to do the optimization for you was just quite unnerving. And I felt like you couldn't really do, and you still can't really do, advert testing properly because of this. But the one best practice that Google are recommending is headlines. And I think for me, with my kind of old school mentality, I always had an approach where you pin the headline 1 because I want to match that keyword to the headline so I can maximize quality score and all that type of thing. And I think, to be honest, a lot of us had that approach to begin with. But we really thought that we needed to kind of put this to the test to give the responsive search ads, I suppose, the most potential to do a good job of mixing and matching headlines and allowing the machine learning to do as good a job as it can be. And ultimately, these were the results that we got. So astoundingly, a positive outcome really when it came to unpinning the headlines. So 67% a positive outcome. We saw an ad strength increase of 96%, but what does that really mean? I mean, ad strength to me is a bit of a proxy metric. It's a Google vanity metric in my view. What do clients care about when it comes to ad strength? I'm not really sure if they're that bothered. What they really want to understand is how much more revenue I'm getting, how much more traffic I'm getting. Has it impacted the click-through rate? So this 96% increase on ad strength just because you've unpinned the headline, to me, it doesn't matter. I think it's just Google's way of wanting advertisers to unpin all of the headlines. But the most important thing in here is that what we did see is that click-through rate did increase on the vast majority of tests, so 76% increase. And ultimately, the impressions increased by 55% as well. So I think what this told us was not only was Google doing a good job of increasing the click-through rate, but actually the search queries were matching to more searches when we had unpinned assets in place. So if you've got a good strategy with adverts where you've got plenty of different headlines and descriptions, they're all unique, what that was showing is that you had a much better chance of actually not only increasing click-through rate, but also increasing the impressions as well. There was one particular area that really bucked the trend here though. Brand campaigns had a significant, recorded significantly less click-through rate improvements. So when we had brand adverts pinned, we actually saw a less positive outcome. So I think for us, be careful when it comes to brand because people do still want to see the brand within the adverts. It's one thing that we saw. So I think when it comes to testing, be careful when it comes to those sort of branded terms because it clearly is important that the brand does feature within the advert and people can still see it. So that's one thing to be careful of. Broad match, and I think I don't need to go into too much detail in this room, and everyone knows what broad match is. I think if you go on a call with Google, you're going to, the number one thing that they're going to tell you is to use broad match, and it's been like that for the past few years, obviously. I remember when I first started out, if we ever audited an account that had broad match, it's like, right, easy day this. we're going to find all sorts of problems with this account. It's going to be in an absolute state, and 9 times out of 10 it was. I think everyone knows now that it's a much better, much more refined match type. And we are seeing much more success with it, as I'm sure you guys are as well. Everyone knows the benefit in terms of the expanded reach of broad match, but I think there's certain, this kind of update here sort of went under the radar a little bit for me. And I think everyone else as well, potentially. And it's an interesting one, because what it's essentially saying is that, okay, broad match has access to all of these features, and against phrase match, there is a distinct advantage for broad match, because broad match has access to user location. It has access to previous searches, phrase match doesn't. It has access to landing page context, phrase match doesn't. So Google are clearly putting a competitive advantage here on broad match, and there's an obvious reason for that, isn't there? Google wants advertisers to spend more, so putting broad match at a competitive advantage by not using all of these signals here is clearly a strategy that they're doing to get people to spend more. So we still need to put this to the test though, and that's exactly what we did. And again, a very positive outcome overall. So 73% of the tests that we ran had a positive outcome for broad match. This is probably a bit more of an obvious one. Broad match drove incremental clicks and conversions on 98% of the tests, which you would expect to see. I think what most people are interested in, though, is what happened to the return on ad spend. And actually, on the majority of tests, of 59% of tests, we did actually see an improvement in ROAS or CPA when broad match was used. But again, there is a massive caveat here to be really careful about. Low volume campaigns really struggled with broad match. So if you've got a low spending account, if you've got campaigns that are only driving, well, if they're not driving 30 conversions in the last 30 days, for example, we saw much lower performance. So like I said, broad match is a very useful tool, but not in every instance. So be careful with the lower volume campaigns, because it didn't always work out well for us. And consolidated structures is the next one that I want to come on to, and something that we've been testing a lot over the past year. So when I first came into Journey Further, I inherited this mess. So this is an account which was split by match type, by device, by anything you can possibly think of, keyword theme as well. So these are low volume campaigns. This was a campaign that was kind of primed perfectly really for manual bidding, for maximizing quality score, but learning's worst nightmare. So this is the structure that I now use on this account. And we've been testing this a lot, and actually way more often than not, the vast majority of the time, 88% of the time, consolidating structures, so moving away from this kind of like, I mean, certainly single keyword ad groups and campaigns, that sort of thing these days, it's just not going to work anywhere near as well. There may be instances, potentially, but the vast majority of the time, consolidation is going to work for you. And I just wanted to kind of show you one particular case study on this. I'm kind of proud of this one because this was one of my accounts. So Helping Hands, we started working with these guys at the start of this year. They had a crazy campaign structure. So they felt necessary paying per branch because they wanted to be able to change the bids for each branch. What these guys are doing essentially is, so Helping Hands, they sell home, live-in care, for example. So if you need someone to go and visit an elderly relative to give care, that type of thing, that's what these guys do. Ultimately, what we were trying to do was drive calls. And what they also told us is that there's two different types of customer ultimately. So we've got live-in customers. So these are the type of customers that need a carer to live with the elderly person sort of 24/7 really. And then you've got visiting care, which is people that would go in for kind of just a couple hours a day, carers that were going for a couple hours a day. At the time, they were valuing those type of customers exactly the same, and they were using a target CPA strategy. But after talking to them, it became very obvious that these type of living customers are actually way more profitable for them. But they weren't changing anything in their conversion setup to go after those type of users more so. So we kind of did two things with this consolidation here. So we wanted to get rid of these 800 campaigns because that was sort of quite crazy, but we still wanted to give them the option of bidding to different levels of aggression if they needed to. So we said, okay, try and group these branches into 3 different categories ultimately. So your tier one branches, so they're the ones where you want to give more emphasis to them. You want to have the bids stronger essentially. So tier 1 had a lower return on ad spend, lower ROAS target. Tier 2 branches was where the bulk of branches were. And then tier 3 is essentially the ones where they didn't really need to add all that much focus. So that had that's the wrong way around, sorry. That should be high ROAS. So that had the least aggression ultimately. So this is the approach that we had. And these type of restructures, we're not talking about kind of incremental gains here. What we're talking about is massive changes to performance, and restructures, more than anything else I've ever done in PPC, are the one things that can have huge impacts almost instantly. So we saw that with these guys. I mean, 28% increase in overall calls straight off the bat, to be honest, with a 34% reduction in CPA. But the most important thing is we wanted to drive these tier 1 customers, and the value-based bidding strategy allowed us to do that by 5 times, so 503% additional leads from those tier 1 customers. And also the live-in customers as well saw a huge increase of nearly 400% as well. So yeah, I can't stress enough how much these consolidated structures can have a huge impact on your account performance. This kind of leads on to the next one, and again, this can make a huge impact as well. So optimizing towards a better business goal ultimately. So the types of things I'm talking about here is, instead of optimizing towards leads, optimizing towards qualified leads. Instead of optimizing towards calls, optimize towards meetings. Instead of optimizing towards revenue, optimize towards profit. So we're going into a kind of a deeper conversion goal here, or something that gives a better quality conversion goal to the client. And again, when we've tested this, 71% of the time we have seen a positive outcome. It doesn't always work. We've seen some inconclusive results, we've seen some negative results, but astoundingly, most of the time, a positive impact when we're optimizing towards a kind of a better value business goal. I think my favorite kind of case study really on this is using profit. And it's amazing, I find it amazing that retailers just simply aren't really doing this. Whenever we audit accounts, I don't think I've ever seen one where they're actually doing this. We work with profit, a tagging solution to pass profit back into Google Ads. A couple of different clients, and this really is the way to go for retailers. Just to give you an example here, so for this particular client, selling perfume, we've got one product here. This is the own brand product of this particular retailer. So although the price, the revenue is the same as the designer perfume, the profit margin is far greater. So using profit metrics, this allows us to upweight the bids accordingly for the products which ultimately have a better margin. And again, as you wouldn't be surprised, the results are greatly in favour of this solution. So the product, which was the own brand product with much higher margin, allowed us to drive a lot more profit. So we saw 25% more profit with an 11% higher profit on ad spend on this particular product. And then again, we're talking about optimizing towards a better value business goal. But conversion goals alone they're not always, it's not always the only thing we can do. So for this particular clients of Boots Hearing Care, we used conversion value rules to, I suppose, assist the smart bidding to get a better outcome. So Boots Hearing Care, again, we're trying to drive users essentially, I suppose, into store here to make a booking for a hearing care appointment. And we looked at a few different data sets to see what impacted performance. So the three things that we looked at were availability of the next appointment, distance to the nearest competitor store, and time of week. But the one piece of, the one data set that really stuck out to us when we were doing this data analysis was the availability of the next appointment. There was a significant correlation between that and conversion rate, which doesn't I suppose sound. I guess it's pretty obvious, isn't it? If someone's looking for an appointment and the availability is not there, the chances are that they won't convert. But when it comes to using a typical conversion setup, then there's nothing in there really that can allow you to adjust the bidding based on there. We're optimizing toward bookings, and what else can we do to influence it when we know there's this other behavior happening here? So conversion value rules was the way we went to go with this to complement the smart bidding to get it working more effectively. So the store availability data we scraped from the client's booking page ultimately. So we're able to look at every store in the UK. What was their availability like? Did they have any? Was it high? Was it low? And we created a predictive model to look at, okay, what's the propensity to convert off the back of this store availability data? So this was, to be fair, quite a painstaking process to develop this predictive model. But once we had it, we could apply the predictive model to the conversion value adjustments using the Google Ads KPI. So what we're saying here, we're ultimately training the smart bidding. So we're saying upweight bids essentially, or give a greater value to locations which have a higher store availability. And again, this is the type of thing where we saw great results off the back of it. So a 31% increase in bookings, 20% reduction in cost per booking. And we were able to deliver, I suppose, insights that the client wasn't previously aware of. So for example, this map here, they had no idea of store availability really. The way we scraped the booking page gave them those extra insights and ultimately allowed us to flex spend based on capacity of these stores. So yeah, we were really kind of proud of that particular case study. But yeah, out of all of the tests that we've done over the past year or so, I thought it might be interesting to just show you where we've seen the most success. So the highest impact tests that you feel, maybe you guys might want to look at some of these for any of your own particular clients. But the one thing that really stuck out for both retail and lead gen is that consolidated account structures was the one thing that made a huge impact. That was number one across both. For retail, the next thing was Performance Max versus standard shopping campaigns. We saw 85% success. So we're adopting PMax more where it won't work. And I would always recommend to use the Performance Max versus standard shopping experimentation feature before you fully roll that out. But when we've done that, 85% chance of success. And I think an area that's overlooked within retail, the feed is often an area that's neglected. But whenever we look at things like title optimization, description optimization, we saw a lot of success in this area. And then from a lead gen point of view, aside from the consolidation piece, the deeper conversion action that we looked at with Helping Hands was a key test that worked time and time after again for lead gen clients. And broad match versus phrase, 73% success rate across lead gen. So yeah, hopefully that's kind of given you a bit of I suppose a story of what we've been working on over the past 12 months and the tests that we've been working on, the particular tests that have worked well for us. So yeah, thank you guys.